Okay, so last video we discussed Nen and its major principles, and now today I will be discussing the principle that I didn't go over in last video, and that is Hatsu. Hatsu is the part that makes Nen really cool in my opinion. Hatsu is basically one's unique Nen ability. In Nen, there are 6 different aura types that a person is born with a natural affinity to, and with said types is where someone can create their own unique ability. The 6 different Nen types in Hunter x Hunter are Enhancement, Emission, Transmutation, Manipulation, Conjuration, and Specialization. Each person is born with a natural affinity to one of these Nen types. One can determine their affinity in many different ways, but the most common is known as the water divination technique, or divination. I'm pretty sure it's divination. Basically, one gets a glass of water and puts a leaf on it. Then you must apply Ren to it. Then something will happen to whatever that is, this leaf water thing. And depending on what happens, that's the Nen type you have a natural affinity to. So let me go over what may happen to the water. If the water volume changes, then you're an enhancer. If the taste of the water changes, then you're a transmuter. If the color changes, you're an emitter. If impurities appear in the water, then you're a conjurer. If the leaf moves, you're a manipulator. And if anything else happens that doesn't involve those others, then you are a specialist. Before I get into these different Nen types, it is important to keep in mind that apart from some really rare circumstances, it is impossible to be 100% efficient in other Nen categories that isn't your own. How it works is your Nen category you could use at 100%. The 2 neighboring ones you can use at 80%, the next ones in line you could use at 60%, and the one completely opposite of you can use at 40% affinity. The only exception to this rule is specialization. No one can use specialist abilities aside from other specialists. There is a chance that manipulators and conjurers can become specialists later in life due to them being next to specialization, but until then, no one can use specialist abilities besides other specialists. Due to all these factors, it's typically encouraged for one to base their Nen ability around their own Nen type, though it is possible for one to develop abilities outside of his or her primary aura type. One is typically going to be less proficient at using those abilities. By creating an ability that one isn't suited for, one risks stagnating their potential by overloading their capacity for using Nen. Example of this being Castro when he made a clone. Even though he's an enhancer, he used a clone, which is conjuration and I believe manipulation. And as you can see how far that is from enhancement, it's definitely not something you want to create as an enhancer. However, there are some Nen masters who are so great that it doesn't even matter for them, and they do everything because they're just so powerful. A best example being Netero. He's naturally an enhancer, but he has the freaking 1100, or like was it the 100 palm thing, where that is definitely some conjuration and other things involved, but he's naturally an enhancer, so he's just built different. One last concept of Nen that I want to touch upon before I get into the categories is known as conditions. Basically, one can place conditions on their Nen ability in order to power it up in some way. Also, one may make like a stake of some sort where if they violate this rule, something bad will happen to them, which can make this condition even stronger. Kurapika is the best example I can give for this. Basically, with his ability known as Chain Jail, it enforces Zetsu on whoever he wraps in his chains, effectively making it impossible for the person to get out. What he did in order to get this crazy strong ability is he placed a condition that he could only use this ability on the spiders, on top of which he also staked his life on it, making this ability super OP to anyone who's a spider. And last thing to note about conditions is that it entirely depends on one's points of view. So if a user views something differently, then they cannot break a contract. For example, if Kurapika viewed Hisoka as a Phantom Troop member, even though he technically isn't one, the Chain Jail would still work on him. Now we can finally get on with explaining each type of Nen affinity, starting with the most basic one, enhancement. Enhancers typically use their aura to strengthen or increase the natural abilities of an object or themselves. Similar to the basic principles of Nen, enhancers simply use their aura to power up their bodies and potentially other objects, making it or them stronger, more durable, etc. Which is why it's typically considered the most basic Nen type, because there's not really much different than learning the natural Nen abilities like Tan, Ren, and all that stuff. There's not really much examples of enhancers having unique Nen abilities due to it being so basic. Enhancers typically will just throw hands. However, there are some that do place conditions on their Nen to make themselves stronger. Like an example would be Gon's Jajangkin, where he's not able to move from the position he's in, but in exchange for that, his enhancement punch is super strong. Next up, we have emission. Emitters are able to more easily separate their auras from their bodies, allowing them to effectively shoot out their aura. The most common cases we've seen of emitters is people such as Gon and Killua's dad, where they're firing off these like Dragon Ball Z-esque energy blasts. However, you can also use your aura to emit other things like in your body that's not energy blasts. Like, for example, somehow people like Leorio are able to do portals. Like, they're able to do portal stuff, like teleport their fist somewhere else, and he's not the first one who does this who's an emitter, so I assume emitters can also use portals. Next up, we have transmutation. Transmuters are able to change the properties of their aura to mimic something else or replicate specific attributes of something. Example of this being Killua changing his aura to mimic lightning, and Hisoka's bungee gum mimicking the properties of both rubber and gum. Also forgot to mention this earlier, but this also applies to emission and all the other Nen types as well. Due to these being pure aura, you can't see them unless you use Gyo, or in specific cases the Nen user can also allow you to see them, so someone not using Gyo won't see the bungee gum or won't see Killua's lightning. Next up, we have conjuration. Conjuration can create physical and independent material objects out of their aura. Now, the difference between conjuration and transmutation is that transmutation mimics the qualities, while conjuration you're actually making the object. This is the only Nen type that a non-Nen user can see without them needing to use Gyo, since conjurers are actually creating the objects. Notes of conjuration is that it is impossible to conjure something supernatural or anything that is beyond human capacity. Example that was given in the story was that you can't make an unbreakable sword that cuts through anything. You can conjure a very sharp, durable sword that you can power up through Nen, but that's almost useless over just buying a regular sword and using Shu. However, what one can do is make something close to that by using conditions. Typically, conjurers are the ones most likely to use conditions. Again, the best example I could give is Kurapika and his chain jail. Another example is Kite's crazy slots. Basically, he gets a random weapon every spin and doesn't get to choose his weapon, but in exchange, every weapon he has is super powerful. Alright, next up we have manipulation. Manipulators use their Nen to control living or non-living things, including aura constructs. Manipulators are the Nen users who can pour the most aura into an object and often rely on a medium to utilize their abilities, like Shalnark's phone or Illumi's needles. Basically, using manipulation, once one meets the conditions one sets on their ability, they can use their aura to manipulate whatever that thing is. So, like for example, you know, Shalnark puts, or Illumi puts this thing on someone and now they're able to control them. Finally, we have specialization. Basically, specialization is an ability that doesn't belong to the others. As I said earlier, it is impossible for any non-specialist to use specialization abilities. I do want to say something real quick before I keep going. A real quick misconception I want to get out of the way when it comes to specialization is people thinking that specialization means you can control all Nen types 100%. That is not true. The same percentage thing applies to specialization. Like specialization is only 80% with conjuration and manipulation, etc, etc. I think this misconception comes from Kurapika because he said, when I am a specialist, I'm able to wield full control over all the Nen types, whatever. But you guys gotta understand that that is Kurapika's unique specialist ability. Kurapika's a specialist because he can control all Nen categories 100% completely. So that is Kurapika's special ability, but that does not apply to all specialists. But yeah, specialization is pretty simple. It's pretty much just you have an ability that doesn't fall into the other Nen categories. Examples being like Neon's fortune telling and Crollo's ability stealing. Oh boy, and that is it. That was a lot, but I hope that allowed you to at least get a slightly better understanding on how Nen works. This is my favorite power system, and it's what made me really like Hunter x Hunter. However, there is a new certain power system that I also really like that's starting to give Nen a run for its money, but I'll get into that in another video. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed the content. And as always, have a wonderful day.